In this video, we're going to be covering the engine lubrication system. We're going to look at the additives in the oil, viscosities of the oil, change interval, the API standard, filtering, and oil cooling. Three primary jobs of the oil. First is lubricate, obviously. The second one is to cool, particularly the pistons. The only way we have to cool those pistons is to spray the oil at the bottom side. The third one is to clean. 1 barrel of oil is 42 gallons. On average, it's only 1.5 gallons that is converted to lubricating oil. And this is all our oils from the 30 weight on up to the 90 weight oils. As they go through and remove the contaminants, they're categorized. Group 1 still has up to 10% contaminants. The Group 2 has 3% contaminants. If you look on the manufacturer's website, so you go and buy some manufacturer's oil, look at their specification sheets. Nowhere on their specification sheet do they tell you Group 1, Group 2, Group 3. Because that oil, that natural oil, can still have contaminants in there, it is for that reason alone that I would switch over to using synthetic oil. When you get to Group 3, this is really close as far as what they've purified, what they've cleaned out of there, to your polyolefin oils or the synthetic oils. The Group 4 is man-made oil. They make the lubricating oil from natural gas, connecting the hydrocarbons together. The Group 5 is synthetic. I'm not exactly sure what the difference is between the Group 4 and the Group 5. One article that I read, the guy says, well, Group 5 is an oil that doesn't fit in the other 4 groups. The oil additives. This is not going into what specifically they use, at least on most of them, but the oil additives that are in there. First one I'm going to talk about is the anti-foaming agents. I remember growing up back in the 60s, up into the 70s, when you pull the oil cap off, it was not uncommon to see some foam around there. Now, this is not the foam that you would see if coolant was leaking into the crankcase. Then you get really crazy, goopy mess inside there. But just normal condition, the oil will aerate, and then it'll foam up, come up to the side, and kind of dry out. They put additives in there to prevent that aeration. 1, you don't want that foam occurring. 2, you don't want the oil to aerate. If the oil starts to aerate, it gets air bubbles inside there. Now you put the oil in between the crankcase and the bearing. If there's oil bubbles in there, that means there's oil not in there, and you're more likely to squeeze that out and start having metal-to-metal contact. Another additive is corrosion and rust inhibitors. Coat something over the oil that'll help protect it from rusting, but they put inhibitors in there that improve the oil's capability. Another one that's becoming more and more important is the extreme pressure resistance. Now, looking back at the crankcase to bearing, power stroke, that piston is pushing down on the connecting rod's pushing down on the crankshaft. As you start getting more horsepower out of a small engine, that means that piston is pushing harder on the crankshaft. If you push hard enough to squeeze the oil out of there, you're going to have metal-to-metal contact. Lose horsepower, wear out the engine faster. They design the oil, 1, to stick to the surface so it can't be pushed out. 2, it allows it to be deformed and yet not break apart. They put detergents in the oil to help clean inside of the crankcase, prevent that sludge from building up. It suspends the dirt particles that are in there, the sludge particles, and those get deposited into the oil filter. When you see oil that's advertised as high mileage, what they've done is they've put a higher detergent or higher percentage of detergent in there. The last one I put on here is friction modifiers. One of the friction modifiers that they put in there is the ZDDP, which I don't remember off the top of my head what that stands for, but you can look that up. It's zinc something phosphate. Your engine needs 1,200 parts per million. While I was at SEMA, I met this one guy that's a member of this organization, and it's just a group of people that they know everything that there is to know about lubricating oils. And he was the one that was telling me you need 1,200 parts per million to provide adequate protection to the engine. So the ZDDP was discovered back sometime in the 40s. They started using it in airplane engines, and then it moved to the automobile. The ZDDP is part of what makes the oil stick to the surface. When you have your camshaft and a solid lifter, you've got this surface that is going to rub inside of here. The ZDDP sticks to the surface so that it provides that protection. If you decrease the ZDDP, it won't protect from that rubbing surface. What they discovered as they were examining catalytic converters that had failed, the ZDDP is killing the catalytic converter. Your cylinder wall and your rings, you've got a oil seal ring that is supposed to scrape the oil off. Doesn't get 100%. You don't want it to get 100% because your two compression rings that are above that, those need to be protected. They need a little bit of oil in there. Because of that, you're going to have some oil that gets into the combustion chamber. The oil that's in the combustion chamber can and does go into the exhaust. You're always going to get a little bit going through there. Because it killed the catalytic converter, and then they also discovered that the ZDDP that goes into the atmosphere is really bad for the environment. If they had a good replacement for the ZDDP, we wouldn't have any of it in there. They don't have a good replacement for it, but the API standards are decreasing the amount. When they went to the SN standard, it only allows for 800 parts per million. The SM standard only allowed 1,100 parts per million. And what I have discovered from talking to people in the industry that know a whole lot more than I do, you need 1,200. The argument again was with the newer camshafts, we have roller lifters. We don't have that sliding surface, so we don't need the ZDDP. Well, there's an argument against that, and that is, again, back in the cylinder, we have a ring or rings that are metal-to-metal sliding contact. We do need the ZDDP in there. However, on the automotive oils, they're not allowing it. Some people are using the diesel oils, lubricants, which does have a higher percentage of ZDDP. You can also go to racing oils and off-roading oils like that, and those will actually tell you the percentage of ZDDP. If you've rebuilt an engine, it'd be a really good idea to buy a rebuild oil that those have up to 3,000 parts per million of the ZDDP. The American Petroleum Institute. So I just discovered just before I made this video that there is a new SP standard that's out there. So they've gone beyond the SN. There's also what they're calling a GF5, GF6. The GF5 standard was the same as the SN. The GF6 is a standard that came out in May of 2020. The newer model vehicles are going to require that. And it's like the other oils. If it meets the GF6, that means it exceeds the GF5. I did find this chart right here. What you're looking at, the blue line, is the protection of the GF5. The red line is showing you the improvement of the GF6. They also broke the GF6 into a 6A and a 6B category. Here's the emission system durability. So again, protecting the catalytic converter, the GF6 stayed the same. So I'm guessing that the new SP standard is the same, 800 parts per million. Seal compatibility. The early synthetic oils were accused of breaking down the seals that are in the engine. Well, if you had an old engine, and we're talking about old going back in the 70s, yes, it was possible, not likely, but possible. The newer engines with the Viton seals, that's not going to be a problem. The improvement in fuel efficiency. Will the oil, or can the oil affect your fuel mileage? Yes, it can. Corrosion protection, emulsion, volatility. So here's all the different things. You can pause it and look around at what they're putting into the oils, the additives, and what they're actually trying to achieve. Also wanted to talk about GM's Dexos. GM was the first manufacturer to come up with their own standard of oils. And I did some research and found out the Dexos, which is a standard GM has had for over 10 years now, is actually a higher standard than the new GF6 or SP. There has been complaints about, hey, GM is not allowing you to use whatever oils. They're going to prevent you from getting warranty work done if you don't use their oil. There was also complaints about, hey, this is going to drive the price of oil up. And those arguments were from 10 years ago. If you look, no, it didn't drive the price of oil up. 2, GM recommends the use. They warn if you don't use a Dexos oil that you could have premature engine wear, but they don't require it for the vehicle to be under warranty. Looking for a standard, just know that if that container says it's Dexos, it actually exceeds the SN and the SP standards. Viscosity is defined as the resistance to pourability of the oil. The higher the number, the thicker the oil is. When you get to a 90 weight oil, that's going to be really thick. When you get down to a 10 weight, 20 weight oil, that's going to be really thin oil. In the engines, they'd been using the 30 weight oil for quite a while. Then we started getting into the multi-viscosity oils, which that tended to fall into that group 2, group 3 oil when they went to the multi-viscosity. If an oil gets cold, it's going to get thicker. Hotter it gets, the thinner it gets. What's going to happen with your straight 30 weight oil, if you lived in a really cold climate, so you're up in Alaska, northern parts of Canada, or even some of the parts, Minnesota, Wisconsin, where during the winter you wake up and it's minus 20 degrees outside. With that straight 30 weight oil in your engine, you start it up, that oil is too thick to provide the protection that you need. If you were to take the 30 weight oil out and put in a 5 weight oil, yes, it would protect it when it's cold. But now you get it up to temperature where the oil is 100 plus degrees, that 5 weight oil is too thin, it won't protect it. So you need to take the 5 weight oil out and put a 30 weight back in. With a multi-viscosity, it is not going to get as thick when it gets cold, it's not going to thin out as much as it gets hot. So the 5W30 means when the oil is cold, it has a viscosity more like a 5 weight oil. When the oil gets hot, it's going to have a viscosity more like a 30 weight oil, meaning it's going to provide a more even level of protection through the temperature range. Putting the wrong oil in can affect fuel mileage. I remember when this one lady brought in her Grand Am and she showed me her mileage thing. She recorded how many gallons, how many miles. Here's what her fuel mileage is, and she showed me that her fuel mileage dropped 2 miles per gallon. Put the scan tool on there, looked everything over, took it for a drive. I'm watching the fuel trims. Man, there is nothing wrong with this engine. Everything runs perfect. And I bring it in, and I'm writing out that basically no problem found, writing down the things that I checked. And the service manager comes over, grabs something off the windshield, and I look over at him because he's just walking away. He just didn't do things like that. What it turned out, she had taken her vehicle to one of those quick lube places. They had put in a 10W30 instead of the 5W30 that was supposed to be in that engine. The deal was, she pays for an oil change. We'll put in the correct oil. If her fuel mileage does not come back, all she has to do is come back, and they'll refund her money for the oil change. She never came back. So there are engines out there, I know from experience, can drop up to 2 miles per gallon by putting in the wrong viscosity oil. There are other engines out there that have very small passages to get oil through to help cool parts of the head. If you put in a too thick of an oil, it can't go through those small areas, and you can damage the engine from putting in the wrong oil. Make sure the oil that you get is the correct oil. If you end up using those quick lube places, make sure they are getting the correct oil in. Here's the big question. How often should I change my oil? Most manufacturers are going to recommend somewhere between a 5,000 and 12,000 mile oil change. Part of the reason for the difference there is if your engine holds 4 quarts of oil versus if you've got 7 or 8 liters of oil in the engine. The more oil that's in there, the longer it's going to last. It can keep the dirt suspended. There is also severe service. The manufacturers will say if you drive your car at severe service, you need to change the oil every 3,000 miles. Then there's people who say if you drive your car on the road, that is severe service. Well, to me, that's like saying the manufacturers are clueless as to what it's like to drive on the road. They're not. I looked up Hyundai's definition of severe service, Honda, one other manufacturer, I can't remember who it was, and AAA. They all had very similar descriptions for what severe service actually is. And that's what we're going to take a look at. First one, taking a trip under 5 miles. When the engine is cold, the piston is not round the way it's supposed to be. It's more of an oval shape. You're going to have more blow-by gases. The primary blow-by gas, and this is the gases that blow past the rings, which you're always going to have some blow-by gases. It's not a perfect seal. Primary blow-by gas is hydrocarbons. Those hydrocarbons go into the crankcase. If the crankcase is cold, they're going to condense, stick against the walls. The oil's going to splash. It's going to mix up with the oil. It's going to dilute the oil, and it's going to cause the sludge buildup, which is what you see in this engine right here. This person definitely did not change the oil as often as they needed to. Once the engine gets up to temperature, those hydrocarbon vapors that blew by the rings, if it's hot, they will stay vaporized, and your PCV system, positive crankcase ventilation, will pull those hydrocarbons out, helping to keep the oil clean. Cold engine, PCV system can't do its job, and you have more blow-by gases. If you take short trips, I'm not talking about an occasionally you drive your car just to the store and back. This is your commute. You're consistently driving your car and it is not reaching operating temperature. That's a severe service. Some said 5 miles, some said 10 miles. I went with 5 miles because most of the time when you're driving close to home, you're going to have more stop and go traffic. The engine will get up to temperature. Another factor that will affect this is, do you have a V8 or do you have a small 4-cylinder engine? In other words, are you 1.2, 1.5 liter engine, or are you pushing 6-liter engine? Bigger the engine, the longer it's going to take to warm up, so you'll need to adjust this accordingly. Also, if you're get up to cruising speed quicker or doing the stop and go. Second one, driving in extreme temperatures. Really cold. Again, up in Alaska, it's minus 20 degrees for most of the winter. You start the car up, it's going to run cold longer, meaning it's going to have more blow-by gases that get into the oil. Yes, you do need to change the oil more often if you have the extreme cold. The extreme hot temperatures, now let's go to Death Valley. During the summer, it's 110, 115 degrees ambient. However, that blacktop road that the car's going to drive on, right above that blacktop, you're going to be temperatures closer to 150 degrees. Well, that's where the car's going to scoop the air up to try to cool the car off. So they're going to use 150 degree air to try to cool the oil, cool the engine. It's going to run hot. So extreme cold, extreme hot. Yes, change a little more often. Extensive idling. Are you doing a lot of stop and go traffic? So for example, let's take the Seattle area. Let's say that you live north of Seattle. You're up in Linwood or even up into Everett. And you work downtown Seattle and you start at 8 o'clock in the morning. So for your commute, you get out onto the I-5 parking lot going south, and it is stop and go traffic the whole way in there. If the traffic wasn't there, it'd be a 10-15 minute commute for you. With the traffic, you're an hour driving stop and go. Well, visualize your car stopped, your engine is running. That is hours on the engine with no mileage on the car. So if you do primarily stop and go driving, again, that is going to be extreme service or severe service. Change your oil every 3,000 miles. For myself, I work in West Seattle. I live in Renton. My commute is about a half hour. I drive 17 miles. About half of it is 40 miles an hour plus. About half of it is stop and go. I change my oil about every 5,000 to 7,000 miles. You need to look at your commute, decide, are you doing mostly stop and go? As far as I'm concerned, if it's 50% or more up to speed, it's not going to be classified as severe service. Next one, dusty conditions. If you live on a gravel road, there's going to be a lot of dust getting in there. They try to filter that out, but they're not going to get 100% of it. So again, dusty conditions, change oil more often. The last one on there, if you tow a trailer or haul heavy loads. you need to change oil more often. Here again, I'm going to make a difference on there. If you've got a car or a half-ton truck and you're hauling heavy loads, well, they're not really designed for that. Half-ton truck isn't designed to be hauling a 7,000-pound trailer. Can they haul a 7,000-pound trailer? Yes. But if you've got a 7,000-pound trailer, you really want to go with a 3/4 ton or a 1-ton truck. On the light-duty side, yes. If you're hauling heavy loads or on a trailer, change oil more often. If you've got a 3/4 ton or a 1-ton truck and you're hauling that 7,000, 8,000-pound trailer, well, they're designed to do that. So I would not be changing oil more often. Engine oil life monitor is what the manufacturers have put in the vehicle. Is that little light telling you to change oil soon or change oil now. When I was working for Mercedes for a summer, they've got that light that comes on every 10,000 miles. Mercedes claims to have this sensor in their oil that will tell you if the oil is dirty, and the light will come on sooner. Well, every single car that came in there for an oil change and talking to the other techs, they're going, no, it's 10,000 miles regardless. In this one M class that I changed the oil on, pulled the drain plug out, and that oil comes out and just goes gloop, gloop, gloop. Oh man, I would not have wanted to look inside there, but it was right at 10,000 miles. And I guarantee you this person did all of their driving in town. So who knows how many hours were on that engine before they brought it in for an oil change. Here's where I like GM's engine oil life monitor the best. I'm prejudiced towards GM, so take this with a grain of salt. But GM's engine oil life monitor has a counter inside there. When you start your engine up, it's going to look at the coolant temp, it's going to look at the vehicle speed, it's going to look at the engine load that's on there, and it's going to be taking off like 2 counts for every crankshaft revolution. If you've got the engine up to temperature and you're cruising down the freeway, that's the ideal condition for an engine. It'll take off like a 1/2 count. On my GM vehicles that I've had with the engine oil life monitor, it'll come on early, 4,000 miles, give or take, and up to 7,000 miles before that light comes on telling me to change oil. You need to look at your own driving habits, look at these, decide if you drive under severe condition or not, and change your oil accordingly. With the oil filter, every time you change your oil, change a filter. I've talked to people who only change the filter every other time. No, don't do that. Every time you change one, get a good oil filter. Do not get the cheapest one you can find. One of the differences, you look at this oil filter here and you see the pleating on there and compare it to the pleating on this one. There's a lot more surface area on this one to be able to capture the contaminants than on this one. The other one that you're not going to find out is what size particulates does this catch. The manufacturer will tell you, hey, this will catch down to 5 microns. Yeah, that's great. On a lot of them, they'll catch 10% of the 5 micron. So they're not going to tell you what percentage. They're just going to tell you whatever their best one is. You're not going to know unless you have access to some of that information. And for the most part, that's not available to the mortal man. You've got to be some sort of god within the company to get that access. Put this image on there, which has the wicks. So I use wicks. I'm not trying to push wicks. I do not believe that their filters are better than the other manufacturers. One of the things you'll find is there is the wicks and there is the Wicks XP. Don't buy the wicks. If you're going to go with the wicks brand, get the Wicks XP. It's going to be a better quality filter. The reason I put this image in here is because I wanted you to see this spring. That spring pushes this filter down. As the oil comes inside of here, this captures the dirt on the inside, comes through. If this filter plugs up, the pressure is going to cause this filter to push up, and now your dirty oil is going to bypass there. You don't want that. Change the filter every time you change the oil. The valving in here is going to keep the filter from draining out. It's going to keep your oil passages full, so when you start the car up, it's going to lubricate immediately. When you change the oil, well, those passages are dry, the filter's dry. What you want to do is you want to fill this filter with as much oil as you can before you put it on the car. That's going to decrease the amount of time before the engine gets lubricated. The other thing that I like is the OE filters. So the original equipment, if I'm working on a Ford, a Honda, GM, whatever I'm working on, and I'm doing an oil change on there, if they have the Motorcraft or the Honda or the Delco oil filters, I'm going to go with that because I know that's going to be a good quality filter. Aftermarket manufacturers will make a cheap one and they'll make a good one. Because a lot of people, when they go into shop, what's the cheapest I can get? And that's what they buy. Don't do that with your oil filter. Buy a good one. I also found a cleanable filter. This one I found when I was at SEMA. When I do my oil change now on my wife's car, unscrew that oil filter, pull the filter apart, and clean the filter. The advantage to it is less restrictive than these paper filters, so the oil gets pushed through the engine quicker. It requires less pressure from the oil pump, so it actually helps to improve fuel economy. But the other thing is, it is 100% 5 micron in its ability to capture contaminants. So it's a really good filter. The guy was also charging $100+ for that filter. We just got my wife's car. We're going to keep it for years, so I will get my money back on that filter. The one problem I have run into that filter is the amount of torque that you put on tightening up the filter. You've got to tighten that one up more, otherwise it'll work itself loose and start leaking. Just real quick on this, because as a technician, this is not something that you're going to have an effect on. Our sump to oil pan, we're going to have a screen down here. Oil is going to be drawn through there under vacuum up to the pump. From the pump, it's going to go to the filter, hopefully go through an oil cooler. From there, it's going to go to the crankcase. It's going to be sprayed up at the bottom side of the piston. That is the only way we have of keeping that piston cool, is the oil that is sprayed on the bottom side there. That's another reason, or the primary reason, you want to make sure that you have that oil cooler. It is also going to be pumped up to the camshaft to lubricate the camshaft bearings and your valve assembly. Oil coolers, if you don't have an oil cooler in your engine, I encourage you to get one on there. This is one of the aftermarket. Again, I'm not pushing this brand. This is just an image that I found. When you mount these on there, this adapter goes on there and goes right underneath where the filter goes. So this filter is going to screw on top of that. The fluid that goes through here is going to go through the cooler and then back into the engine to lubricate everything. You need to have these flexible hoses because the engine moves around. This filter is going to be mounted solid, so that's going to allow that to happen without fatiguing and breaking the line. Also want to talk about the oil pump. Manufacturers will make a variable displacement oil pump to decrease the load on the engine. The less energy that's used to pump the oil through the engine, the better fuel economy. Second one is an oil pan. If you're going to change the oil pan, if you can buy an aftermarket oil pan that'll hold more oil without sticking down where it's going to get wiped out when you go over a speed bump, that's better. The more oil that you can put in the pan, the better it is. The more oil that's in there can suspend the dirt. And again, you can increase your oil change intervals by having a larger pan. The maintenance side, check your oil regularly. On the cars today, unless you have an oil leak or you're burning oil, you don't need to check your oil every time you fill up the car like you did back in the 60s and 70s. Change your oil at regular intervals. Look at your driving habits. Decide if it's a severe service, how often you need to change it. When you do change the oil, put a good quality oil filter on there. Last thing, check the PCV system. If you know how to check the PCV system, check that. Make sure that it is working correctly. They do have a tendency to get plugged up. If you don't know how to do it, take your car to a shop and have the shop check to make sure your PCV system is working correctly. That's it for this video. I will see you next time.